You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima.
Good morning, Justin.
Good morning, Allison. How's life going over there?
Well, at this moment of recording, I am a week and a half out from being an empty nester.
Oh, man.
I know. Thank you for saying that so sadly and with the respect that it deserves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's ready. She's excited. Mm-hmm. We're excited for her. It's going to be, she's going, for those who don't know, she's going to a school that's right here in the Twin Cities.
Mm-hmm.
She is living on campus. So it's like, I know that she's not, like moving across the country.
Right.
But she is moving out of the house.
Yeah.
And that feels like a really big deal. Mm-hmm. And we're going to try to do the thing where like we drop her off and then we're like, goodbye.
Yeah.
And not just be like, come home for dinner on Tuesday, mm-hmm. like really have her like get acclimated and stay there.
Yeah.
So that feels really sad.
Yeah.
I mean, we feel like 100% confident in her school choice and that she's going to be amazing. And it feels like a really big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for like a caregiving tie-in, something that I've been like kind of grappling with is we're pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she was born when I was like 27.
Okay.
Because we started the adoption process when we were young.
Yeah.
So we're pretty young. I mean, I'm only 44. Sean's only 45.
Mm-hmm.
And we're about to be empty nesters. And so some people are like, well, that's so great because you've got your whole life ahead of you. And now, like you can do whatever you want and you can travel. But it's like, no, we can't.
Yeah.
So that feels tricky that it's like, it should be this big moment of like, wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But like we have other restrictions.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So that feels kind of rough.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll just be over here weeping in my pillow for the next while. I'm not good at transitions. I know it about myself. I acknowledge it. Even when they're great transitions, not good. Don't do well with it. So I guess acknowledging it is the first step.
That's right.
So that's what's going on here. How about you and your side of the world?
It's been a good week.
Yeah.
My family went camping across the mountains, and so I was able to join them for a few days.
Yeah.
And it was just lovely to be kind of disconnected from just the normal life.
Yeah.
And just kind of relax. And I did some birding over there, and just experiencing some different landscapes from what we see here, and just the beauty of the nature there. And it was a really restorative time. And so I'm still kind of like riding that a little bit. Yeah.
Oh yeah. How long were you gone?
I was gone for 5 days, which is the longest I'd been gone since before Sarah got sick.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How'd that feel?
It went good. I think Sarah was ready for me to be home.
Yeah, I'm sure.
For sure. But we made it work. And it felt like a big deal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So didn't you go to Alaska on a boat or something once? That wasn't this long?
No, that was like 2.5 days.
Oh, okay.
That was a very short trip.
Okay.
Relatively short. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I'm happy for you. I mean, I'm happy for you both.
Yeah.
That you're in a place where you're like, yeah, I can go for 4 or 5 days. No problem. And that you like got this restorative, trip, and that you're still feeling it days after. And so that's all great.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's also, there's also a piece of like, being there with family and everyone's complete family is there, and it's just me and not, it's not something Sarah can do. And so I don't know. It's not like it's this amazing experience.
Yes.
It's also is a reminder of how our life is different.
Yeah.
And I think that I've done this enough where it doesn't hit as hard as it did, I think, the first few times.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still there. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. It's something that maybe we should talk about at some point, because I hear that a lot from caregivers where they're like, I want to keep doing things. Mm-hmm. And so do I go out and do the trip? Do I go on the thing? Do I go to the show? Do I whatever, like without my person, like on my own or with another friend because I want to still do it. But even if I do and I have a great time, there's the grief of like, I really want to be doing it with my person.
Yeah.
You know, so
yep.
We can do another topic on that one. But yeah. Speaking of topics, what are we talking about today?
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about autonomy and kind of with the person we're caring for, what is our responsibility? What can we do to help respect their autonomy, help them preserve some semblance of autonomy? Because I think that if you're sick, you have an illness, a condition, and like your life suddenly is super limited. You don't feel like you have as much control over everything. You can't do all of the things you used to do. That must be just a really hard thing to grapple with. And I think as caregivers, we want to do everything we can to make the life of the person we're caring for easier. And, I think that can, if we're like jumping in to do all the little things to help them out, like I could see that feeling from their perspective, like, no, wait, I can do some things, I still want, and so I think it's an interesting thing to talk about. And it ties back to what we talked about a couple episodes ago on like medical appointments.
Yeah. Advocacy.
Advocacy and what our role is there to speak up. When do we not speak up? What is, respecting what they want to be to say in the appointment, what they, just how to balance all of that. And I think it's an important thing to think about. So what are your thoughts kind of as we start talking about this?
Sure. I think there's a lot of angles here, right? Because you mentioned like sort of the tasks piece, but I think there's also like decisions.
Yeah.
And especially like, I think we'll talk today about the different pieces, like what if you're caring for aging parents or caring for your kids, but especially I think if you're caring for a spouse, like some of the medical decisions they might make, even big to little, are going to impact our life as well.
Right.
And so we want them to be able to make decisions and do their thing, but we also like that's going to impact us. And so where does the line fall? So like, let's say there's a person who, there's a treatment out there, right? And maybe like the patient, the person, the loved one wants to pursue it and we don't want them to, or they don't want to. And we can see that like, but maybe that would give you more time, or maybe that would, you know what I mean? Like how to make these decisions. And so that's like a giant one.
Yeah.
Or even if it's like, oh, the physical therapist says, so I always think about like, so Sean's supposed to do these like swallowing exercises all the time because he's had so much stuff go on in his throat.
Yeah.
That he's supposed to do all these like swallowing exercises. And he never wants to. Yeah. Right. And so anytime we see the PT, she's like, you doing your swallowing exercises? And he's like, no. Right. And so I don't want to be his mom. I think that's part of it too. Right. And so I want him to be a human and an adult and an independent person, but also like it's a big deal if his swallowing is impaired.
Right.
And so how much do I say like, do your exercises, man, just do it. And how much am I like, he's an adult if he's choosing not to? But then also I'm like, if he doesn't do them, then does that turn into this? And does that turn into this? And then our whole life is impacted.
Right.
And so it's this like domino effect of like, in this really hard piece of they're a human and they're going through a thing and they get to make decisions about their life and their treatment and their body, like from teeny to large. And like it impacts our life as well. And sometimes I think we can see things that they can't. Yeah,
that's true.
And so then we have this perspective potentially of being the outside person. So it's complicated. It's tricky. And I'm just going to throw all the spaghetti at the wall here right now, and then we can untangle it. But I also then think about like things like personality or Enneagram types.
Okay.
Like Sean is a 9, as we've talked about, which means he's a peacemaker. And I think has leaned in hard to that during this time. So he's like, I do not want to make a decision. It cannot make a decision. I do not want to like peacemakers. They don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And so for him, if I was like, I'm going to give you all the autonomy, you get to decide all the things. you'd be like, please, no.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Even more. And so I think that's even more so, like, so respecting him in this point is actually doing some of those things. And then sometimes it's like, am I doing too much or too little? You know, anyway, I just threw a lot at the wall. What stuck out to you?
Yeah. The one thing that thought that I had that we can start with is, so you're talking about Sean and the swallowing exercises.
Yeah.
And like there's the two extremes of your role in that, whether you are like really on him for like, you've got to do these, you've got to do these, you've got to do these, like all of that. And also just 100% hands off, you know, he can make his own choices. And I think it's somewhere in the middle where you want to have like a conversation. Like, I see that you're not doing these. What's that about? Or, you know, try to get that understanding, not coming at it from I want a specific outcome as a result of this conversation, but from wanting to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I think that that's a important place to start with that.
Yeah. I think you're right. Instead of just like berating, like, you know, and saying like, what's that? You know, like you said, what's that about?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just wondering, I've noticed I know she's telling you to do these. I noticed you haven't. I'm just wondering what might be standing in your way. Is there anything that I could do to encourage you to do that? I don't want to be a nag, but I also don't want, you know. So, and I think part of it is knowing your person enough to know what's going to help, right? So for some people, it might be me saying, like, I'm really worried about your swallowing, and I'm worried that you won't be able to enjoy the things like food, or talking, you know, that you like to do if this doesn't happen, right? So that might be the thing that works in some scenarios. Other scenarios, it might be like, some people might be like, well, I'm fine, but it would be really more impacted if I said, well, it would be really hard for me if you weren't able to talk to me anymore because you couldn't swallow. You know what I mean? And so I think it's sort of knowing your person and knowing where is that middle ground, what's going to work for them. Because some people, the more you kind of nag, the more they're going to be like, absolutely not.
Exactly.
You know what I'm not going to do now? My swallowing exercises, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think it's part of that. And, you know, we've talked about it in the past, but I think you and I both we're fortunate to have really like strong relationships with our person going into these diseases and diagnoses. And so that can be really hard, because if that's not the case, even if it is the case, this is hard to manage. But if that's not the case, I just, you know, it can be even more complicated. And so just sort of playing around with what's going to work and what's not going to work, you know, with that frustration of like, they're supposed to be doing a thing. They're not, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably some people too where it's just like they forget, and they need that, like, they want to be reminded to do it. And so, you got to know your person in that sense.
Right. Yeah.
I think another area where this can come up is if the person you're caring for has limited energy.
Yep.
They only have so many spoons.
Yep.
And you see them spending their energy on what to you doesn't seem like the best use of their energy.
Right.
And you know that there is something else that needs to happen, and they're not going to have the energy for that, or, you know, however that plays out. But that's a tricky one, because like we have this outside perspective in that sense a little bit, it feels like that's, you know, we're a step back, we can see. And so again, it's having that conversation. You know, I see that you're spending your energy on this. Is that really where you want to be spending your energy? Because we have to do X, Y, Z, or I know that you really enjoy doing, you know, this other thing, and you're not going to have the energy for that if you keep spending your energy here. And I think we're kind of, I think mostly talking about within like a spousal setting here. I think some of this may apply, and we can talk a little bit more about other situations as we get along here. Yeah. So I think that there's this element of, you know, we're kind of on the same team.
Yeah.
And what they're doing impacts us. And so, you know, we want to, I don't know, we see the choices that they're making too, and I think we see how they impact us.
Sure.
So we may see that they're spending a lot of energy on, I don't know, I'm blanking on a specific example.
Sure.
But they're spending energy on something, and you see from that they are going to, in the next day or 2 or 3, just be completely wiped out. And as a caregiver, you're thinking about these next few days are going to be a lot for me. And so I think in having that conversation with them, how do we bring in like, what you're doing is going to make life more difficult for me,
right,
in a respectful, diplomatic way.
right.
Again, I think understanding, like, I see you're doing this. What's that about? Because we also have this.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to bring up the piece about the choices you're making are going to make life harder for me.
Right.
That's a tricky
one. I don't know if that's one we need to say out loud. Right.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Because we also we're doing it because we care for them.
Yes.
Right. So like, let's say hypothetically, like Sean and I are going to meet some friends later tonight.
Yes.
And then I see him outside and he's like, decides to rake the leaves. Like neither of these are like within the realm of possibility, but I'm just giving an example. I would be like, oh friend,
yeah,
like I'm feeling worried that because I know it's going to be a lot for us to go out tonight. And so I'm feeling worried that if you use this energy on these leaves right now, you won't be able to do that later. And I'm guessing that you do want to go to the thing later. So I think it's, it is that it's harder on us and it's that we care about them and we don't want them to be like totally toast and not be able to go to the thing later, or totally toast and be burnt out for 3 days. But I think asking the question, because they might be like, you know what? I know that. And these leaves, like it actually means a lot for me to be able to break these leaves because this is something I have not been able to do. You know what I mean? So they might have like a reason. And so I think it's good to ask for them to either be like, yes, I know what I'm doing and I have a reason for it, versus them being like, oh, I forgot that was tonight. You're right.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, you're fine if I don't rake these leaves. I was doing it because I thought you wanted me to, or you know what I mean? Like, so kind of putting it out there. And so I think it's all coming at it from a place of compassion and almost like, I don't know if inquiry is the right word, but like, like, hey, I see you're raking these leaves even though we have this thing tonight. And I'm just wondering, like, do you feel like you have enough energy for both of these things? Like, tell me more. You know what I mean? As opposed to like, what are you doing? Or sitting inside and stewing and being like, he's not raking those leaves and there's no way, and that's going to ruin everything, you know? So, I mean, partly this is just like good relationship communication. It's just that there's extra layers.
For sure.
In situations like ours. And I think even so with that example about the leaves.
Yeah.
And if he had said like, I've always loved raking the leaves, just give me this thing. You know what I mean? So I've done webinars and things on like caring for aging parents and things like that. And so that's one of the things we talk about there is that, let's say your mom loves going to the grocery store. Like that is her thing and she loves it. And she like is friends with the checkout people and you know what I mean? Loves it. Like make that the very last thing you take away from her.
Right. Yeah.
Think about all the other things. Think about things like, okay, we're going to have Shipt deliver the really heavy things or the bulky things. Or we're going to like get a lawn service or we're going to get a cleaning service. But think about the thing that like makes them who they are, that brings them the most joy, and take that away last, if ever, if you need to. But I think that we don't think about that enough. We just think about what's the easiest thing to, and so we could just be like, we're getting a grocery delivery service for you. You don't have to go anymore. And she was like, no, like give me that thing, Yeah. So I think we can think about that with any of these, if whether you're caring for kids, parents, spouse, whoever. What is their thing? Like, what's the thing that they're like, this is part of who makes me me, what makes me me? Because I think that illness and injury can take away so much of that identity. And so if we can like, just throw them those bones, and be like, they're out there raking, but that's because that's their thing.
Yeah.
No,
I think that's like a really good encapsulation of like how to approach this is what is their thing? What is the thing that brings them joy? What is the thing that fills their cup? And finding the way to make that possible for them, to look at it as like we're supporting them in getting the fulfillment out of life in the areas that they can. Yeah. Yeah. And that's to approach it from that perspective, I think, rather than approaching it from, like you said, grocery delivery, for your example, like that's an easy thing to do. Like these it seems like low hanging fruit,
right?
But to know what's important to your person.
Exactly. And I think even with some of these, like, let's say they really love, I don't know, paying the bills, like balancing the checkbook, if people still balance checkbooks, like that kind of thing. And so instead of being like, you know what, I think that they have chemo brain, or they're getting older, or I'm worried about their math skills at this moment. Instead of just, if that's like their thing, instead of taking it away, come alongside them.
Oh yeah.
And just be like, hey, let's just do this together. Why don't you teach me your system? Like, let's do this system. And even though that's going to take longer and take double energy, like, again, like it's about not taking that thing away from them. It's letting them hold on to it as long as they can.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, even about like, if you're caring for kids with special needs, like what is it? What is that thing?
Yeah.
Like, what is the thing that might make them feel like, oh, this is just like, there's so many other things I don't get to do. Just give me this thing, And so how can we really keep that idea kind of front and center?
Yeah.
As we think about this autonomy thing, even if it's harder for us.
Right.
Because we have to rearrange or handhold or whatever. But like, I think it means the world to those people when they can have that, maintain that thing. Yeah. And I think that ends up being worth it in the end.
Right. Yeah. I think another area, and I think I mentioned this at the beginning, is like all these little things that maybe they struggle with doing a little bit. Like maybe, I don't know, it could be opening jars. Maybe they're weak and they can't open jars, or just small things around the house. And our inclination is to just sweep in and like, oh, I'll do that for you. Oh, I'll do that for you. And, these days there is so many different like adaptive devices to help with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You can get things to like make it so you can like more easily open like a can of soda.
Sure. Yeah.
Things, or like opening cans. There's can openers that are more ergonomic. There's scissors, all of these things, and finding those little things, looking at the things that they struggle with. And rather than like, I'm going to just do that for them every time, trying to be creative in how you can, whether it's getting a different tool, or like setting them up for that task differently. Maybe there's some prep work you can do on something to kind of make it so they can more easily go through these steps, but just giving them that little bit of like feeling like they can actually do things, rather than, because I can see that feeling like, well, you don't think I can do anything, and just feeling like everything has been taken away from you, and everything is being done for you, and just that being a place of struggling with that, and not thinking about your worth and all of that. I don't know.
Sure.
It's gotta be difficult. So I think that's an area where I think we can, find ways to make little things in their life more possible.
Absolutely.
And find small ways to give them back some of that autonomy.
It makes me think of a word we use in education, which is scaffolding, which I'm sure you can assume, figure out what that is. But essentially it's like, what is the boost we can give them so that they can do it independently?
Right. Yes.
And so I love those examples, that instead of just being like, okay, well, give me the jar, I'll do the thing. Like, no, let them continue to do the thing, but give them the scaffolding so that they can do it in that way,
Yeah.
Because I think a flip side of what I hear of that sometimes from caregivers is the loved one ends up being like, I'm not opening any jars. You open my jars. And eventually the caregivers are like, dude, open the jar. Like, you can open the jar now. You know what I mean? And so I think it can get into this kind of skewed thing either way. So if the scaffolding pieces are there in place to make it more accessible to them, they can kind of build their skills back up potentially.
Right.
Either to being able to do the old version of the jar, or they can just use the new thing, and then they can do it forever. Right.
Yeah.
So there's something that they can do, And I think it's one of these where like, it helps us, right? Because then we don't have to open all the jars, but we don't have to say it that way. It's not like, whew, got that, cross that off my list. It's more about like, hey, I got you this thing so that you are able to have independence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. I think so. Another area that we haven't really delved into yet that I think is a more heavy area of this is like treatment, courses of treatment, and medical decisions.
Yeah.
And how you manage, like, what's your role in giving your opinion, and what if you mentioned this at the beginning, they don't want to pursue a direction of treatment that you really think that they should, maybe, or they want to try some really intense treatment, and you're like, that seems like it's maybe a long shot, or we feel that the piece of that's going to put more on us, and how we manage that, and where their independence is, especially like then within a spousal relationship, like, well, what you do affects me, and we're kind of a team in this, and how that piece, how you approach that. I think that's a more difficult, thing to approach.
Sure. And I think there's the piece of like that it impacts me because that means I'm driving into treatment every day.
Right.
But there's also the bigger picture of that impacts me because you're going to be really sick, and I'm going to have a person who's really sick, or whatever that is. So it's not just like the tasky ways that that influences us, but it or impacts us, but like our life. I keep trying to think back. Do you remember when we interviewed Death Doula Jane?
Yes.
And I remember that I think that it was her husband was like in denial.
Okay.
And was just sort of like, I'm going to try all the things. Try it. And she could, I think, I could be misquoting this, but I think she could see the writing on the wall, and he could not.
Right.
And he was just like, I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I want to try this. And she was just like, no. And so I think there can be that aspect of like a person could be in denial of like, I'm fine, or this is not a thing, or this is whatever. And I wonder if in some of those situations, it's helpful to get some outside support, right? So maybe it's your medical team, your palliative team, your somebody to be able to objectively say, here's what I see. Here's what I would recommend. I mean, obviously the patient still has the autonomy to make the decision. But if it's between, like, if both of you and your person are like in it, it's really hard to make these decisions. But if a medical provider says, technically, yes, there's another treatment you can do, and I don't know if the pain and suffering that it's going to cause is going to be worth it. If it was me, I would, you know what I mean? Something like that. Somebody who's like a little bit stepped out of it, so that you don't have to be the one to say like, I don't think we should pursue this, or we should, or, whatever. Like, how can you find an outside person to be able to be a little bit more objective?
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's also, there's the reverse of that example where they're tired. And you've tried all the things. And they're just like, I can't do it anymore.
Right.
And I can't imagine being in that place, but that happens. And you can't make them keep trying things. And I think that brings us to, specifically with these medical choices, like we've respected their autonomy, and we've ended up, they've made the decision, and it's maybe not the decision that, or the direction that we would have gone, or we question that being the right choice. However we want to put that. Once the decision is made, I think we have to support them 100%.
Yep.
And that's hard. And especially if it feels like it's just not worth what they're doing, or like it's just putting so much on you, whether that's emotionally or logistically. But I think if you are constantly like, if you're bringing up that, well, I said we shouldn't have done this. That's not going to be helpful.
Not helpful.
But it feels like that's a place where we are having to put our own feelings aside, put our own selves aside a little bit. And like we have to do so much as caregivers. And that's just tough. Yeah.
Because I feel like if the patient is saying, I'm done, I got to be done. Like, I feel like you got to respect that, right? Like I feel like we can't push like another treatment on a person who's saying, I'm done. But I think the flip side feels harder if you as the caregiver are like, I think you should be done. Like, this is going to be hard on you. This is going to be hard on us. This is going to, but they're like, I want to keep going. You know what I mean? Like, because then it feels like if you as a caregiver are saying, I don't know, like, are you saying like, I don't want you to be around anymore? You know what I mean? Like, I'm tired. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, that's complicated.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you're right. In any of these, I think it's like to get other, I don't say other perspectives because it's not like, let's poll the family. Terrible idea. Don't do that.
Right.
But like to sit down with your team to say like, what's really going on. There's, as a quick side note, there's this oncologist at the U of M that I just so love and appreciate. And one of his studies that he's doing is about it's called time toxicity, which is like, how much time do we spend as patients and caregivers getting to appointments, going home from appointments, waiting in the waiting room? Like, so they figured out that like a simple lab draw could take up to 3 hours of a person's time. Right. And so part of why he's doing this is so that if we say to someone, you have 3 months, you could have 3 months if you do nothing. You could have 5 months if you do this treatment. Most people are going to be like, 5 months. But what he's trying to paint a clear picture of is, what is that 5 months going to look like? Yeah. And how much of that time are you going to spend in a hospital, in a clinic, in a car, sick, right? And so I just say that because it's like, I think that we need to have some more of those really honest conversations from our providers and with our families to know that like time, just having 5 months instead of 3 months seems like a no-brainer until but it isn't a no-brainer, right? There's more to that. And so how can we bring some of that nuance into the conversation when we're having some of these things, Right. Yeah. Because I wonder that like whose voice gets to be the most important there. You know what I mean? Like, and as a spousal couple, like you would hope it would be a joint decision. But again, like what if you don't agree? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. It's hard.
It's hard. It's really hard. From these teeny tiny, like opening a jar to end of life decisions and everything in the middle, like, because they're not an island, their decisions impact others. And we can sometimes, like we've said, see how their decisions impact them, maybe even in ways that they can't see.
Yeah. Right.
But how do we say that while still being respectful?
Yeah. I think we lead off with something a little less, I don't know, what's that about? And I think it's approaching the conversation with them, understanding where they're coming from. Yeah. Having that, like a place of compassion for them and what their experience is. And I think in having the initial conversation, like approaching that as like really just, I want to listen and understand where they're at, as opposed to, I think that initially it's not to voice your thoughts on the situation. That can come later. Sure. But I think it's important right away to, okay, why is this what we want to do? What you want to do? And it very well may be something that they have struggled with, and like it's been probably a very difficult decision for them. And I think the more we can understand their experience, not that it's going to make this whole situation easier, right? But I think that we can maybe have more peace about the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think a piece of it too, I talked a little bit about personality types, and I was talking to a caregiver recently, and we figured out together that one of the reasons that they were so frustrated with their person and how their person was or wasn't doing, all of the things, was just that the caregiver's personality type is different from the patient's, as most of us are. Yeah. And So the way that she would have been handling the illness is very different from the way her person is living out the illness.
Right.
And so it was feeling like, why is he not doing this and this and this and this and this? And then finally we figured out it's like, oh, because if you were the patient, you would be doing it this way. And so it's making you feel a little nutty that you're watching someone live this really important thing out in a different way than you would be doing it. And so I think that's an important piece too to think about, is like, it's not about how we would do it. You know, like, again, where is their autonomy? That, you know, some people might be like, I am going to, you know, only have green juice and bone marrow broth and whatever, right? Like that might be their decision. And that's the way they are going to like go into this thing. And other people are like, my life's going to be short anyway. I'm going to eat that French fry.
Right.
You know? And I think that if we're the green juice person and we see the French fry person, we might be like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And we need to realize, like, where's that coming from? And if they say like, all the other joys have been taken away from me anyway, give me the French fry. You know, how can we respect that instead of being like, is the French fry going to cause a thing that green juice wouldn't have? I don't know. You know what I mean? And so how can we realize that how much, if any, of our frustration is coming from the space of that, like our, we might have done it differently if it was us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I think another area to talk about here is there are, you know, what if their illness is truly making it so they can be less autonomous? You know, whether that's dementia, some sort of cognitive decline or something, and they truly just can't be fully independent. And you don't want to treat your aging parent like a child. You want to respect them as the adult that they are through that. And you brought up the great example of keeping the one thing that gives them joy for as long as possible. And I think that's great. You know, like an extreme example is, you know, there are these, I don't know, in Europe, they have these, I don't know, they build like these communities for people with, I think it's like dementia and things like that, where it's this isolated, like little, like couple blocks of a town and everything is there. They have like the salon, they have a grocery store, they have like, they live in sort of like little apartments. And they can, you know, they can't get out necessarily, but they can feel like they're doing all of these things. And there's no money involved, so that they forget to, you know, they don't worry about forgetting to pay or like counting out the money or anything, but like they still are making choices and doing things in this safe environment. And obviously that's not, you know, we can't recreate that if that doesn't exist, if that hasn't been created. But I think that we can look at that, and it's scaffolding. It's the scaffolding that you talked about. That's a lot of scaffolding.
But
finding the thing, you know, maybe it's they choose what they want to have for dinner, you know, what the meals are going to be. You know, you're going to be preparing meals, but you know, what is it that you want to eat? Whatever the thing is. But I think it's throughout the course of something like that, finding ways where they can still feel like they have a voice, like they still can do things, have some agency. I think is so important. And I haven't, you know, I'm speaking from a point of not having experienced that. So like, I want to acknowledge that. I haven't been in it, and I imagine it's easier to say that that's an important thing than to actually find ways to implement that, I imagine.
Well, I think even about, so my aunt lives in town and is 81 and lives in when she moved here, she didn't bring her car because we were like, you know what, you're going to live in this retirement community and it's a new big city and all of that. And just thinking about how hard that piece is, you know, like one day she was like, a lot of people I know are having birthdays in August, but I can't go to the store unless someone takes me. You know, and even like when I do take her to the store, it's like, you know, she knows that I'm waiting and, you know, and so just that piece is so tricky. Just like, you know, she needs some peanut butter. She's got to ask somebody. Like, she can't just hop in the car and go. And, and that's hard. And so like, it's like, what are other ways that we can give her that agency? I think that's such an important word. Even like, you know, we go to a lot of like shows and musicals and concerts and stuff. And she one day was like, well, I feel like you're not you didn't invite me to that one. And I said, well, I didn't because I really didn't think you would like it. I didn't think it was your style. And I said, but I shouldn't assume that. So I said, from now on, every time I go to a thing, I'll send you the blurb about it and a little video clip about it. And then I will let you decide.
Right.
And so then she looked at some things and she's like, you're right. I wouldn't have liked that, but I will like this one, but I think she just appreciated that I was like, I thought I know you pretty well. And so I just was assuming, but for her, it was just like yet another choice that had been taken away from her. And so for me to give that back and say like, I'm going to invite you to all the things. Right. And then you get to decide what you want to do and what you don't, I think felt really helpful.
Yeah. That's a great example.
Yeah. I think a piece we haven't talked about too much yet is about doctor's appointments, which is kind of where this whole thing started.
Yeah.
And just, like, let's say we show up and I think it's been like a terrible few weeks and the doctor says, how's it been going? And then let's say Sean says, great. Yeah. And then there I sit and I'm like, what house have you been living in? Right. And so in what point do we let them like how much of it is like, that's his perception. That's not the perception I have. How much of it is like, he doesn't want to go there, right. When do we jump in? Because as we all know, like these doctor's appointments are like these moments in time you have to capture. And if the doctor's like, oh, everything's great at your house. Great. Right. And so what's our role there to be able to be like, actually, I have a different opinion, how do we handle that? So, or if they're not saying, they're not like telling the doctor, like, if it's an elderly person and they're like, have you fallen? No. Right. Then what do we do? And so I don't know that I have the perfect answer. Yeah. I'll let you respond and then I'll tell you a couple thoughts I might have. But,
okay. Yeah. So I think, one thing you could do is you could try to, after the appointment, like communicate with the doctor or the medical team yourself and be like, well, actually this is this. Sure. There are places where that's maybe appropriate. And I think there's certainly places where that's probably not appropriate. Yeah. If it is where there's the cognitive decline to where they're not maybe aware of what's happening as much. And, there's a certain point where I think it's okay to step in and give the medical team a more accurate picture. If it is like, someone who is not experiencing that and for whatever reason doesn't want to communicate that, like, I think we kind of have to respect that. And I think, okay, that happens in an appointment. There's an appointment that happens. Before it becomes like a pattern, like have a conversation after the appointment. Like, I know that you fell last week and you told the doctor you didn't fall. Like, what's that about? To keep using that phrase. Right. But I think that's just a great summation of that. Like, okay, why didn't you want to tell the doctor that? And getting some understanding there. And then maybe before the next appointment, check in and say, okay, so I know that this happened and this happened and this happened. Are we going to talk about that? Or are you going to talk about that? Or, being on the same page as much as you can going into it. Exactly. So you're not surprised by what they're saying. And maybe you still will be. But I think just having conversations before those things, having conversations after them to understand, I think is one way to approach that.
And I think even in the middle, right? Okay. To maybe like I've had moments where I've said in the middle of an appointment to Sean, like, is it okay if I chime in with what I've seen?
That's a great,
like, of course he could be like, no, but he's probably not going to, right. But I have done that where I've said like, is it okay if I share my perspective? But I think it's like it's not just don't do it just in the moment, because then they might feel like we kind of bamboozled them a little bit. Right. Right. But I think you're right to talk about it beforehand. And, to even say like, so what do you think we're going to cover? What do you think is going to be covered in the appointment? What do you want to make sure that when they say how everything's been going, like, what's your opinion? What do you think? What if, so that you're kind of on the same page going into it. Yeah. But then I think in the moment to be able to say, is it okay if I chime in? Yeah. And then, like you said, like sort of a debrief after. The other thing I've heard people do is kind of like give the doctor some eyes if you can, like, hey.
Okay.
Right. So even if, typically it's like the three people end up sitting kind of almost in a row, like the doctor's at the computer and then the patient's in a chair and then you're in a chair. So you can like look over the patient's head and kind of give them the eyes like, that's not true, to try to get them to like delve a little deeper.
Right.
Or I've heard people who have like given the doctor eyes and the doctor afterwards has been like, can I just talk to you for a sec? There's sometimes you could do like using my chart.
Right.
If it's a situation where it's like maybe like a person who the patient themselves isn't using my chart,
right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Or you can send something in beforehand and say, here are some things that I've seen.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you can bring this up. Yeah. Just so it's there, because otherwise, like even if you afterwards say, well, here, they did fall. Well, what's the doctor going to do at that point?
Yeah.
We'll see in 6 months, So, yeah, I think that getting on the same page beforehand is helpful.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what about supporters? What's their role in this? What can they do? I think one thing that jumps out is supporting the caregiver in supporting the patient in doing whatever that thing is that gives them joy. Yeah. And preserving that as much as possible, because maybe that takes some work.
Sure.
The scaffolding for that.
Yeah.
Maybe as the supporter, you can provide some of that scaffolding.
Yeah.
You can be the one that if the grocery store is their thing, you can be the one to take them to the grocery store sometimes.
Yeah.
And really, I think this is a case where you, by stepping in and directly helping the person who is sick, supporting the caregiver that way. Like, I think with this independence, you're interacting more with the patient to provide the respite for the caregiver, maybe, or to take the thing off their plate.
Sure. I think too, with supporters, to like, how supporters sometimes like to give their opinions.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And this is one where it's already complicated, right? Like this, let's say it's a couple or it's a child and a parent or whoever. They're already having these hard conversations about, should we pursue treatment? Should we not pursue treatment? And maybe the two of them are not on the same page. So you hopping in with your 2 cents or your judgment about like, you're not pursuing treatment or you are pursuing, like not helpful.
Right.
Not helpful. And so I think supporters have the awareness that like these decisions are not made in isolation. Like these decisions are not made easily, and so even someone might be like, why are you still letting your mom go to the grocery store? Really? Or why is he eating those French fries?
Yeah.
Doesn't he, like nope. Like just respect that, like they've been having these conversations and there's a reason for it. And, all of those pieces. I wonder about, I'm just trying to think about like how supporters can give autonomy still to the people, and I think it kind of depends on the situation. So like, I mentioned a couple times ago, we were at a graduation party where I was delighted because our friend who was the host was like, Sean, here's a chair. Sean, let me bring you water. Sean, you know what I mean? And I was like, and I think he was super grateful.
Yeah.
But I could see in other situations where people would be like, really? I'm at this party and you're treating me like this? Like, just let me get my own water.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't know what the answer is there.
Yeah, it's the kind of you got to know the person.
You got to know the person, right?
Yeah.
So that just might be something to think about. Is I think it's just like maybe for supporters this time, it's less like a concrete thing and more of an awareness of how can you, supporter, help maintain the agency and autonomy of this person who's going through this hard thing.
Yeah.
And respect that.
Yep.
As it goes forward. Yeah.
Yeah. I've got one last thing to bring up.
Please.
Okay.
Of course.
What this popped into my head in the last few minutes here. And I think one thing that can be helpful in these situations is before you are in the situation, having conversations. So if you and your spouse, you're both healthy, talk about, how you want to handle if, you were to get sick, if you're having to make tough medical decisions, like what is your, how do you want to approach that? Having things like I don't know. There's certain medical documentation that's like this.
Right. Your direct care, healthcare directive.
Healthcare directive, maybe.
Yep.
And like your parents are getting older. Talk to them.
Yeah.
Then these are hard conversations.
Yeah.
But the more you can understand how they want to handle their aging before they're in a place where they can't fully communicate that well, you're going to have a better experience with that process.
100%.
So supporters, have some tough conversations with the people in your life, difficult conversations about what the future might look like, and prepare for the role of you being a caregiver.
Absolutely.
Potentially. I think is an important thing to do, and something probably in general we don't talk about enough.
For sure. 100%. I think that's so wise. And I think we should all be having those conversations with each other, with our parents, with our loved ones. And even asking that question about like, okay, if there's one thing that you get to do or that you just want to like hold on to as long as possible, what would that be? Now, I feel like I need to mention too, like, safety has to be the number one.
Absolutely.
So they might say driving.
Yes.
And you might have to say, we will let you hold on to that as long as it is safe for you and the other people on the road.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I think, that's got to be the bottom line for everybody's safety. But I think even just to have that conversation about like, we know that as you age, there's going to be certain things that maybe we'll help with, or maybe we'll get other people to help with. Like, what's the thing that you love the most that you want to hold on to?
I love that.
So that we can like prioritize that, because even like sometimes it's like, I really love going to like bingo at the senior center, but then we don't think about like, oh, the keys got taken away.
Yeah.
Now they can't make it there. So we can be like, great. So you're going to, even if the keys get taken away, we will make sure you get a ride to the bingo. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. So I think that, having those conversations early on, like, and knowing that they're going to change. So revisiting those conversations over and over again, right? Is really important. So, yeah. I just want to say quick, because we didn't talk too much about like parents of kids with special needs.
Right.
And I just want to like shout out to them, because it's already hard to be a parent and try to figure out how to give this person, this tiny human, autonomy.
Right.
When their brain is not fully formed. Right. And so I imagine that there's even more complexity there when it's like, I don't want to take this medication. I don't want to do this treatment. I don't want to, it's going to make my hair fall out, or it's going to, you know what I mean? Like, woo, friends. So I just imagine there's an extra layer there when there's already kind of this parent-child dynamic. Yeah. And their brains aren't fully formed. Right. So bless you, parents.
For sure.
Yeah. Oh, this was good.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, this is important to get into. And so thanks for digging into this with me. And I think I'll be thinking about this one for a while.
Yeah.
As always, there'll be a support group on this topic. So watch for that, and then we can continue the conversation there.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, friends. See you later.
Yeah, great talking.
Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care. or on Instagram at InSicknessPodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.